All right, joining us for this very special episode is retired Navy Captain Kevin Eyers. Kevin and I go way back to my days at the Naval Institute. So, Kevin, it is great to see you again.
Mooch, it's great to see you. I'm very happy to be with you today.
So, Kevin, you were a surface warfare officer and you commanded 3 Aegis cruisers. Which ones did you have?
I started out on the Thomas S. Gates CG-51 for my commander command, and then for major command, I was assigned to USS Shiloh, CG-67, and during that tour, we got her upgraded to SM-3 capability, after which we took her to Japan, and we brought back USS Chancellorsville, CG-62, now Robert Smalls. So those 3.
Kevin, let's start with a basic history of the USS Gettysburg, commissioned in 91, did a number of deployments, and then they went into what is called a Service Life Extension Program, SLEP, in 2015. And this process took 9 years and cost $200 million.
That is an extraordinarily long process. I can't even tell you how unusual it is. There have been ships, Aegis-class cruisers, that have gone in the shipyards for lengthy periods for updates, changes to their entire combat systems, and that might take 3 years. You think about that, all of that crew, which has specific expertise in air warfare, anti-submarine warfare, they're not doing anything for that entire length of time except lying fallow. Likewise, even though they're updating systems, any system which is not operated for a long period of time inherently begins to decay, and getting everyone back up on the step has got to be a tremendously challenging thing for any crew and captain.
That kind of gets us to the turnaround cycle before this deployment. So, Kevin, you've heard some words, some characterizations of their performance during, let's just call it spring training, where it didn't go that great. Talk to us about that.
It is said that the ship did not perform well during the training cycle. They got grades which were low average, and this has been a subject of discussion and remark through much of the surface warfare Navy, in particular the strike group and the trainers who found their performance to be less than what was wanted by a fairly significant margin.
They go on cruise in spite of the subpar performance during workups. And so we'll just fast forward to the early morning of December 22nd. Take us to that early morning around 0300 aboard Gettysburg.
One of the interesting things about the Aegis cruiser versus the Aegis destroyer is that the Aegis cruiser is set up to be the air warfare commander. It's got a very large combat information center. It's kind of a U shape. There's surface alley on one side, air alley on the other side, and then there's the front bench, which includes the tactical action officer, which is typically a department head. He's the one who's charged to fight the ship. And the commanding officer is sitting there in a situation like this, right next to him, who's kind of overseeing the whole thing. And then they've got someone to the left who is standing watch as Force. That is the voice of Alpha Whiskey and is running the larger air battle on behalf of the commanding officer of Gettysburg. So the TAO fighting the ship, Force fighting the force on behalf of the commanding officer. And on the air side, which is the interesting side here, there's about 10 people standing various watches. One, for example, is solely operating the spy radar. One is operating the data links. One is charged with identification. That's their specific job. There's someone there who's doing electronic warfare. So there's a universe of people that are involved in this. Now, this was 3 o'clock in the morning. So I am sure that everyone there was under an enormous amount of stress. And on deployments like this, a lot of them are standing port and starboard watches. So They're probably worn out. They're probably very tired. They're under a tremendous amount of stress, which is really pumping things up. And as you know, as you have discussed, the strike group had been under attack by both cruise missiles and drones. And that means that they have a warning status. And the warning status is red, which means that attack is either ongoing or imminent. And with this red, as opposed to yellow, which means it's probable, or white means it's unlikely, they have a weapon status. And the weapon status is either tight, hold, or free. They were probably in weapons-free status. And what that means, because they're under attack, they wanted the force to be able to engage threats rather than waiting for permission. If you see something and it is not positively identified as a friend, you shoot it. Now, the way that they probably break this out is they sector the world. So while Alpha Whiskey on the Gettysburg is responsible for the whole picture, including the directing of Cap to engage targets, he will say, Jason Dunham, which is one of the destroyers with them, you watch sector 0 degrees to 45 degrees. Stout, you watch 45 to 180. And if you are Stout and you see something coming in a red and free situation, and you cannot positively identify it as a friend, you are supposed to engage that threat without further command. So they're sitting there. They're under attack. The strike group is under attack. There's also strikes from the Truman going in and out. They're Cap airborne. There's E2 airborne, watching the whole picture, working with Alpha Whiskey to monitor the air picture because they have a unique view of all those aircraft. I'm sure that it was a 3-ring circus, and having been involved in this during Desert Storm, I can tell you that it creates an enormous amount of tension.
We mentioned that the 2 Super Hornets who were shot at, one shot down, were both tanker configured Super Hornets. So you have these in between the strike package going and coming back, and incoming drones and cruise missiles. You have these tankers that are basically giving their gas away, coming back to the ship, gassing up, and then going back out. So this is all to say it was a very complicated picture for Alpha Whiskey. So Kevin, let's go system by system and talk about the chain of events and mistakes that led to the Super Hornets being targeted, and in the case of the first VFA-11 airplane being shot down. So let's start with, and this is something that a lot of folks asked in the comments when I first briefed that this had happened, what about the IFF? So talk to us about the Mode 5 and what the anomaly might have been in this case.
When an Aegis ship is getting ready to fire a bird at a target, it automatically, there's no operator action involved. It automatically does an IFF challenge of that threat. In this particular case, they queried the aircraft with IFF and they got a positive response. And then the Gettysburg recovered a helicopter. And when they recover the helicopter, they stop all radiation in a sector because the helicopter does not need 4 megawatts of power in its face. They shut it down, they land the helicopter, and when they bring it all back up, same aircraft, query, no evident response. It looks like it's hostile. It's at low altitude, low speed, could be a drone, could be a cruise missile, and again, no IFF. So the question is why did that query evidently fail after the first time? As far as the Gettysburg was concerned, there was no response from what it perceived to be a threat aircraft.
Okay, so that's gotcha number one. And then there's another part, the push button action versus voice comms.
So the electronic warfare supervisor in Air Alley, he is monitoring Slick 32, electronic warfare transmissions, and he's also speaking to other electronic warfare people. There's a circuit for this. And he had, up to a certain point, I believe that we're on final approach, they shut off, the F-18 shuts off its radar transmissions. But he had transmissions of that F-18. He knew that it was a friend. There's been a problem in the computer system since at least 2023, in which he will identify it, and by VAB, variable action button, on his console, he'll say, this is friend. In the computer program, and again, this is a known problem, there have been these hang-ups where that action doesn't take, and it doesn't get to the rest of the Combat Information Center. So if he went like that and nothing happened, which apparently is what happened, that's a problem with the computer system. It is also said that he spoke, but it's very hard to describe unless you've been there. And, the same thing in aviation. There's a million things going on. We think we're under attack. We are under attack. Our job is to defend the entire airspace. One voice saying, hey, I got a positive shine from that track. It can be lost in the noise. If the VAB doesn't work, which automatically will do something in the system, him just saying, hey, I think that's an F-18. It may not penetrate. The signal may not rise above the ambient noise. And that evidently happened also.
That particular EW station technician did everything right at his level. But as you say, because of the confusion, the crosstalk, and the anomaly of the system, the fact he labeled the Hornet as friendly never made it to the folks who could have interrupted the sequence of events.
Yes, that appears to be what happened.
Now, there's another system called CEC that also could have prevented this, but it was inop.
CEC is the future of the Navy in many regards. It's an entire another issue as to why CEC is not relied upon in every ship. It basically is network sensing. So to me, on Gettysburg, it appears that the radar on USS Stout is also my radar. It appears that the radar on Harry S Truman is my radar. And so instead of just having one radar, my spy radar, looking from one angle, one altitude, in one direction at a time, I've got all of these shared radars spread all over the battle force. The net result, the interesting thing as far as this is concerned, is when aircraft enter in what might be called a fur ball, they are operating in very close proximity. The radar can lose the individual track. And then they come out of the fur ball, and the radar then picks up discrete tracks on these aircraft, and a re-identification process has to start. With CEC, because you're looking at that fur ball from multiple different angles, track of individual aircraft is never lost. And so there is no issue with that. If CEC had been operating, then the operators would have been able to look at this. They never would have lost track when they went to flight quarters. They would have seen the exact same picture uninterrupted. They would have known what that was the entire time without losing track. The fact that the CEC system was down was catastrophic.
And then the last system among the ones that could have stopped the chain of events is Link 16.
The average human being looks at this and imagines that the aircraft is up there on the radio talking to the air intercept controller, for example, his controller, and it's all via radio. It's not. There's also Link 16, which is a data link. No one speaks on it, although there is a carrier that you can speak to on it. But it is it transmits automatically without any intervention a bunch of information on that aircraft to everyone. And one of these things is PPLI, which transmits, here's who I am, here's where I am. And for whatever reason, the PPLI, which would have told the Gettysburg that this is FA-18F number 321, those signals were not getting to the Gettysburg. Again, just like IFF, sometimes these things were getting through and sometimes they were not. In the case of the F-18, which was engaged, at the critical moment, neither the IFF signal was getting through, nor was PPLI getting through. If you have a computer data link saying that's a friendly aircraft, doesn't matter about IFF. I know that's a friendly aircraft. He's telling me via Link 16, I'm in constant, close, immediate, high granularity communications with him all the time. So that also got hung up in this computer system that they were relying upon to work properly.
So at the end of all of these missteps and technical errors, who is it that makes the decision to fire the SM-6 aboard Gettysburg?
The commanding officer.
So does the TAO just wait for him to just tell him, or does he go, sir, how does that go comm-wise on the ship?
They're literally sitting shoulder to shoulder. And the commanding officer is on the same circuit. One is called Link, a Net 15, which is everyone in combat, in the Combat Information Center, is on Link 15 or Net 15. He can hear everyone, what they're saying. He can hear the TAO talking to the air warfare supervisor, to the force supervisor. And the other ear, he's probably listening to battle group command, right? Which is where the strike group commander, the battle watch captain, is saying things like break, engage, ceasefire, whatever top level command is coming to. But that captain is sitting right next to the TAO. The TAO sees this, perceives it's a vampire because he doesn't have the identification on it. It's flying low. I perceive that this was after the primary recovery had occurred. He sees this, the radar comes back up. He detects this aircraft coming up the wake of Harry S Truman. He's got no identification on it. They're drones, they're cruise missiles. He perceives this is a vampire. He orders it. He says, request permission to fire to the captain. And he says, you have permission to fire. Off goes a bird. Off goes two birds, because this is another interesting point. They have a firing doctrine that they program in the ship. And it's either, there's several flavors of this, but the one that they were using was undoubtedly the one that everyone uses, is shoot, look, shoot, shoot. So something's coming in and I fire a missile at it. Only one missile goes off because it's still far away. It's going to go out there. It's going to consummate that engagement. The radar is going to look at it and it's going to decide whether there's debris falling. Was it kill? Did a kill happen? If it didn't, it gets closer. Shoot another one. When you get to the last possible moment of engagement, the system will automatically fire two missiles. It increases the probability of kill. If this aircraft was less than 10 miles away at a speed where this is my last opportunity to get a missile off, the system is automatically going to vote. It's going to fire two missiles. That, I believe, is why there were two missiles involved here. They were both aimed at that particular target. It just happens that the first one got a mission kill.
As we know from the text messages that were sent by the two Super Hornet pilots, they were on their way back. To your point about did they have their radars off, what was going on? So we know, or we assume, based on where they were in their return to force profile, they turned radars off, turned their raw gear, their radar warning gear off, because at that point in the flight, hearing the fact you're lit up is just annoying and you figure you're out of harm's way. So they turned that off. They were switched up button 17, which is Marshall. So they're not talking to Red Crown or Alpha Whiskey. They're not on any of those frequencies anymore. And they were, starting to descend at about 300 knots. So to your point, and this is the first time we've heard it sort of from this point of view around this series of events, to Alpha Whiskey and to the watch team aboard Gettysburg, it looked like a cruise missile coming up the wake of Truman, right? That's what they saw in their mind's eye. And that, absent any ID that would have said, no, this is a, Air Wing CAG-1 Super Hornet, you can see how this huge mistake happened. It's interesting you talk about the shoot doctrine, because the other thing that we believe happened, and this is, I think, comes to your explanation of what Net 15 is one of the landing signal officers saw the first Super Hornet explode, behind the ship.
Sure.
As he's getting ready to wave the guy, right? Because he's about to dirty up, slow down to approach speed. And so the LSO on the platform's looking aft and he sees this explosion. He calls the bridge, and Captain Snowden says, I believe this would have to have been Net 15, basically cease fire. Everybody cut your missiles. And that is most likely what kept the second missile from hitting the second airplane.
Those two missiles, they were only fired at that one target. They were not fired at a second target. It just so happened that second target was in the area. It came down, it hit the one jet, and then the other one's behind it. And at the same time, his tail guy is flying effectively into the target area, but it wasn't aiming for him.
So both shot at Dash 1. Dash 1 explodes. So the second one, as a matter of just consequence, went stupid. It was never aimed at the second airplane. And
Absolutely.
So however close it passed to that airplane was just happenstance.
That was the shoot, look, shoot. The two at that guy that they perceived was a vampire and not a returning jet.
As we said at the outset, this happens December 22nd. A lot of folks in the comments are like, so what happened to the CO of Gettysburg? And again, in the wake of our recent coverage of the fact that the CO of Truman was relieved due to loss of confidence in his ability to command because of the collision just north of the Suez, I think it's a fair question to go, okay, so what happened to the CO of Gettysburg? Obviously, the CO of the ship owns the responsibility, and you wind up shooting down one of your own airplanes. So he was not relieved immediately. In fact, he had a normal change of command about 6 weeks later at the end of January. Captain Justin Hodges was relieved by Captain John Lucas, and it wasn't punitive in nature. It was a normal change of command. So what are we to make of that?
I believe that it suggests that the Navy was aware that it was much more complex than the guy just made a mistake. He pressed the wrong button. If that were the case, if it were a completely human error on the part of USS Gettysburg, I have no doubt that they would have held the commanding officer wholly responsible. I'm happy to say that I believe that the Navy learned something from the McCain and the Fitzgerald situation, where they also intended to hold those COs wholly responsible. And it turned out that it was a lot larger than that. And it appears that this is a lot larger than simple, confusion, hot situation, red war. There was more involved in this. And I don't think that the Navy, whether it wanted to or not, could just simply kind of like go, there's the sacrificial captain, let's get him, and then we'll move on, because we don't like civilians paying attention to family business like this.
So let's talk about some of those elements. Again, we'll keep the who out of it. But you mentioned that the C&D program had some flaws, known flaws, but was delivered anyway under the auspices of the chance for these flaws popping their heads up in the heat of battle was low. That kind of lives at the systems command responsibility level.
It is my understanding that the NAVSEA personnel who were responsible for delivering the command and decision computer system to USS Gettysburg prior to deployment rushed it out the door, knowing that there were flaws in it. Now, normally, every computer system, they're wildly complicated, and they're all delivered with flaws in them, with faults in them. What they do in industry is they determine what these faults are, and they put a line, and they go, everything above this line, we have to fix. Everything below this line, we'll get them. If you're the operator on the ship, you're completely unaware of this. NAVSEA, the Navy's engineer, they know exactly what they're getting and what they're not getting. And it is said that the NAVSEA personnel forced this out the door in order to stay on schedule. And in the forcing, they included, unbeknownst to the ship, that there were faults. And these faults included, we don't get the proper Link 16 signal. Sometimes the IFF response gets caught up in the system. These things become hung in the system. Not always, but sometimes. And it just so happens in this case, there was a confluence of events where many things happened at the exact same time. And I think this became very obvious as soon as the Navy started the investigation. And I can tell you that I can see the tremors of this, because throughout industry, they're getting calls as to whether their computer systems were provided, subordinate systems, adjunct systems, if they had anything to do with this at all. So the query has gone out, but it does appear that the Gettysburg was operating with a problematic C&D computer system, which ended up being the fulcrum upon which all of this broke. I think that's why the commanding officer was not fired. But I'll tell you, Mooch, he didn't get off light. His career is over. With the word in his fitness report, with the reputation of this, while he didn't get relieved, and I think it's because of these other things that were involved, he might as well have. His career is absolutely over.
The other macro issue, and this is what we were talking about up front, is the numbers game associated with fielding a team to send over the horizon. We've talked about we don't have enough carriers, strike groups, period, but we don't have enough cruisers. So when one is a substandard performer during the turnaround cycle and maybe even fails its Comp 2X, its graduation exercise, which is run by Carrier Strike Group 4, they're going on cruise anyway, because there's kind of nobody else to go. And so that ship may have an asterisk on it, but they're going, and they're going to play an important role. And in this case, Gettysburg was Alpha Whiskey going into this event. Now, on the backside of this event, it's my understanding that they were relieved as Alpha Whiskey. And I don't know if it was given to Dunham or Stout, but one of the Arleigh Burke destroyers took up the Alpha Whiskey role, which is kind of an insult to Gettysburg, obviously. The numbers piece are driving a capability, a lethality quotient that is of concern. That's part A. The second thing that you point out in your article, Kevin, is training tracks, because of timelines and personnel and budgets, are not what they used to be in terms of being comprehensive.
They're not. If you were one of these people who operates an air alley, a fire controlman, for example, in the 1990s, you might go to school for 2 years learning what to do. You learned how to read blueprints. You learned how to solder. Now, the training track is very, very short, and we're trying to move towards more of a black box situation. The net result is that the people out there in the ship, a lot of ships are getting underway and going to sea with civilian tech reps on board, because the people who are there, they don't know how to fix it. They were never trained how to fix it. This is a real problem for at least the surface fleet. You know, the idea that you spoke about, that we spoke about regarding, we got no other choice. Gettysburg, it doesn't matter if you did, you know, if we had 27 Aegis cruisers, we could take that, we could flip you with someone else. We don't have 27 Aegis cruisers. I don't even know how many we have now, maybe 5 or 6 still active. You're not going to be able to replace the Gettysburg with another cruiser. So a decision has to be made by someone, and they made the decision, you didn't do very well, we're sending you, try and do better. It just so happened that they send them to the most complex situation imaginable, but things didn't work out as well as they could have. And whether the postmortem will show whether people were qualified, whether they knew what they're doing, that played into this.
Murphy's Law was alive and well, and on the evening or early morning of December 22nd, living in the Red Sea. Kevin will say again, the official report, the unclassed version of it, is not on the streets, but everything we're talking about here is credible intel. We're not just trading in rumor and hearsay, but again, this is not official word that we're talking about here. So Kevin, it's always great to have your expertise on these matters. We'll talk to you again when the final report comes out. In the meantime, I hope our paths cross in real life before too long.
Yes, sir. It was a real pleasure. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything going forward. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.